The following is rated not safe for work. It contains strong language, adult situations, and lots of spoilers. Discretion is advised.
In the criminal justice system, cinematic-based offenses are considered especially heinous. The dedicated attorneys who investigate these villainous films are members of an elite squad known as the Reels of Justice. These are their stories.
Order, please, order. The Reels of Justice is now in session. Judge, I live, I love, I slay. I am Ryan Luis Rodriguez presiding. Well, I'm not, but he is. Your eyes for the Honorable Judge Rodriguez.
So confused.
I am too. I don't get that one.
It's like it's something he says.
Okay. Be seated. Welcome to the Reels of Justice. Today we are hearing the case of the People versus Conan the Barbarian 2011 version. This quote-unquote epic sword and sorcery film follows Conan on an adventure of revenge as he seeks to slay the evil warlord that killed his father and destroyed his people. For those of you unfamiliar with our court proceedings, we are here to determine if this film is guilty of being a bad movie. As always, in this courtroom, films are to be considered excellent until proven awful, and the burden of proof lies upon the prosecution to prove beyond a shadow of a reasonable doubt that this film is guilty. Mr. Case Aiken, you are representing the prosecution. You may present your opening statement.
Gentle persons of the jury, I come not to condemn this film as a poor adaptation of the source material, though it is a surface adaptation at best, nor to deride it for being a bad remake of the Arnold Schwarzenegger film, which it surely was, despite the protestations of the production. No, I come here to identify all the ways that this fails as a movie. For this, Conan the Barbarian 2011 is a bad movie, and in these proceedings, I will make that clear why.
Very cool. Thank you, Mr. Aiken. Appearing on behalf of the defense is Mr. Dylan J. Schlender. Please present your opening statement.
Ryan's my favorite judge. Thank you, Your Honor. Hey, Case, knock knock.
By Crom, who's there?
Barb.
Barb who?
Barbarians at the gates, and let me tell you something.
I knew it.
In a twist, I am leading them. That is right. I am shirtless. I am flexing. I have my war paint on, and it is going down. Because you see, 2011's Conan represents an interesting inflection point in what I am going to call manly man cinema. You see, in that year, we were given a choice. There were superhero movies like Green Lantern, Captain America, and Thor, and there was the subject of today's case, Conan. Conan was originally conceived by Robert E. Howard in 1931, a mere 5 years before Howard would tragically take his own life. The conception of Conan could not be more simple. He's a beast of a man that cruises through his adventures with a mixture of cunning, skill, strength, and good old-fashioned plot armor. Ultimately, the audience went the other way, opting for the Thors of the world with their tortured melodrama and the MCU. Look, there is nothing wrong with Conan's formula. Sometimes it is indeed okay to just be what you are, and that is what we see in 2011's Conan. The problem is the audience was not there for it. So in this case, I want to compare it to the movies of the time. I want to look back to what Conan always was, and I want to blend this into how director Marcus Nispel's, is that what his name is?
Yeah, you get it right. Nispel.
Okay. Nispel? Okay. Into how Marcus Nispel executed on this vision. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schlender. Mr. Aiken, you may proceed with your first exhibit.
Yes, I would like to address the plot of the movie, or the lack thereof, we should say. There's a simple MacGuffin in here, in a basic revenge story that is ripped from the previous movie, but it's mostly just an excuse for action scenes. And while I am always here for action scenes, it is a Conan the Barbarian movie. I did see this in theaters, after all. We have to accept the fact that this is a setup exclusively for the purpose of these characters in cool shots that would look good in many of the music videos that the director was very well known for at this time. But unto itself, it doesn't make sense. It moves haphazardly. The pacing is atrocious. I mean, for example, why do we spend nearly a third of the runtime of the movie in the opening flashback detailing his past life? Why is the crown forged at the beginning during that opening flashback and then not utilized until years later? I mean, I realize that there's a Watsonian explanation, but it makes no sense from a Doyleist perspective. If you were making this movie from scratch, you would have this be more of a Fetch Quest style thing. This crown would be needed to be assembled over the course of it. And you would have actual explanations for what a pure blood means in this context, because it clearly is not virginity, and it might be the blood of the race that this all comes from, but at the same time, how does that even work? Because logically speaking, they need a better explanation for what the lineage that they care about is in terms of like this pure blood construction.
I think we get enough answers to some of these. These are frankly quibbles and nitpicks that you're bringing up here, Case. But let's look at the pure blood. It is you have to be descendant from the actual sorcerer, necromancer king, whatever he is. He was a real bad dude because he made a helmet out of skulls that has tentacles on it. So he's a bad guy. And he had a bloodline that ultimately ended with this one girl who was the last pure blood. Or so they think. I mean, maybe there are more purebloods out there. The Iberian peninsulas are huge and vast and varied. So that's where this pureblood thing comes
Describing
in.
Hyboria as a peninsula is an interesting one.
It's a collection of peninsulas.
It's a supercontinent.
Yes, it is. So it is. Because it's basically the Iberian Age takes place in the time after Atlantis fell, but before ancient society. So it's like this lost age that Howard invented, and the actual continent is kind of like this super not quite Pangea,
right?
But like the Mediterranean's dried out. There's
right. The Mediterranean, the Straits of Gibraltar have sealed. Yeah, it's the Straits of Gibraltar have sealed, and
the point is, it's huge. You would agree to that?
Yes, absolutely. That's why I just laughed when you called it a peninsula.
Yeah, well, I said a collection of peninsulas, to be fair. Anyway, my point is, that's where the pure blood comes in. Now, why was the mask built at the beginning in the flashback? I think the flashback works because we get to see Kid Conan, who is actually, this is a pretty competent kid actor, and Ron Perlman is able to kind of deliver his normal Ron Perlman, like, I'm gruff, but I'm kind of tired, kind of ethos here. I mean, and he should be tired. His wife died. He's sad now. He's a sad barbarian trying to train his son for a better life.
The problem there is that you just cited a thing that I'm going to bring up as evidence in the future, which is the performances of the cast. And Ron Perlman is not carrying these scenes particularly well. Sure, the young Conan is fine, aside from the fact that they have these cartoonish depictions of other savages. When, keep in mind, the Sumerians are supposed to be savages on the highest order. They are the blood of Atlantis. Arguably, they would have a better claim to being the purebloods in the scenario. Side note, but the blood of Atlantis,
don't know if Asheron was Atlantean.
Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. But I'm just saying that in terms of the hierarchy of these like great superpowers of the past, there's always that, and it always creates this fun little scenario that Jason Momoa played the scion of Atlantis, both in this movie and then later again in Aquaman.
One could argue one is more successful than the other.
Yes, one could very well argue that.
And I intend to, Your Honor. Well, and that brings us to another Howard character that we actually saw depicted by Kevin Sorbo, Kull the Conqueror, who actually is
Atlantean.
Yes, actually is Atlantean. So let's not get too bogged down in Conan's background, because what we have in the movie, it's showing us, yes, he's fighting these larger than life savages kind of people, right? Like, because they are. This is something that we see in the novels, the comics. Hell, you could even throw in the Conan cartoon, for crying out loud. The bad guys are they have like an otherworldly, other vibe to them, and that's what these guys were. And so Kid Conan murders them as he should to protect the village.
It's actually a disappointing aspect of this movie that they are not truly abnormal or abhuman in this scenario.
They're making animal noises. Don't
they
you
are
hear
making
them?
animal noises, and
Yeah.
I find it a weird juxtaposition because they are still human actors in these scenes. In fact, they're not even the most like ghoulish looking ones that, as what we see in the in Zim's army has similar kind, or like even more like animalistic kind of features to it. But this is a movie that claimed at the time that it was trying to be more authentic to the Robert E. Howard world, which is more widely supernatural. It's a low fantasy, like the power levels itself are fairly low, but there's a lot of supernatural elements and a lot of preternatural is the wrong word. A lot of historical fantasy kind of things going on. Specifically, the fact that, as we noted, the Hyborian Age is pre-Bronze Age. Which means by definition that the woolly mammoth was still around. We're talking about megafauna abounding, but also that not all hominids had been wiped out besides Homo sapien. So that there are ape-like tribes of men that Conan encounters throughout this whole, or throughout his adventures. And there's like a lot of like broken kind of science that Robert E. Howard puts out there, where like humans de-evolve into apes once again and then re-evolve back into humans in certain cases, which is why like their cultures are kind of like messed up and broken. We are losing a golden opportunity to actually use the Robert E. Howard format and have some of these like weird kind of animals, which includes non-human hominids that you could distinguish by having very interesting ape-like traits. A thing that was shown, for example, in Conan the Destroyer, poorly in that as well.
That's the movie they should have been aping. Pardon the pun here. It's Conan the Destroyer. Yeah, no one's buying that here, Case. Look, the fact of the matter is that these bad guys, they were just like a smidge off human, right? They didn't go full on like the ape monsters and everything because it didn't really fit this story. Not every single Conan story involves monsters and megafauna. Actually, a lot of Conan stories, he's usually in the city trying to scheme something, or he's leading like a small band of people. Like this, the stories are very, very vast and different.
Sure, but this movie explicitly was trying to be a movie that embraced a lot of the higher fantasy elements of the Howard works that the previous Arnold Schwarzenegger movies were not able to do.
I don't think it was trying to explicitly embrace
that
these
was
because you
part
don't
of
see
their
it on the
marketing
screen.
material.
But you don't see it on the screen though. So forget about the marketing. If someone's going into this cold,
there's a necromancer creating sand zombies in this movie.
There is, and it's sweet, and it's clearly one person, right? Like
there's some sort of Cthulhu-esque monster. Like
it's a tentacle monster. So you do get your big monster. So what are you complaining about? That there's not enough, or that they use it wrong? I mean, you can't have it both ways.
Overrule, yes, you can.
I was about to say, I kind of was about to say both.
I'll let him continue on. I'll just keep interrupting. Objecting is what we call it in court, though.
Fair enough. Now, how about the pacing of this movie? So, as I pointed out, the issues with the mask in terms of from a writing perspective, and not from a like, do they have a handwave for why he wasn't able to utilize the mask until years later? But from a writing perspective, I don't understand why you would do that right off the bat. Like, why would you have the villain gain ultimate power and not have it at the very least be a sort of Damocles throughout the majority of the movie? I think that this is one where, sure, he's on a quest to find to find the last pure blood, but it doesn't seem very difficult when he finally does. It doesn't seem very difficult for Conan to interject himself into the situation when it's ultimately happening. And again, it's sort of just like a weird attempt at having this sort of like, she's in a monastery being hidden. It's kind of like a Sister Act situation, but but it's a situation that like has been preserved for centuries, it seems, at least generations, and it hasn't already come up. It seems to be widely held information, at least in the local area. It's at least all the people in this community seem to be aware of it. So it creates the scenario that like the thing that held him up for like, about a decade, maybe 15 years is unimportant, or at least easy enough to like overcome. And so why, from a writing perspective, would you have the ultimate MacGuffin be forged at the very beginning and then not be able to use it?
Look, you can make an argument about when the Skull Crown should have been completed, right? Should we have seen Zim collecting more pieces, or is it more impactful being delivered at the beginning? And one of the things we do learn in this movie is that after Zim completes the crown and Conan goes off on his adventures, remember the Morgan Freeman narration talks about how Conan went out far and wide and all the different adventures he had already been on in that 10-year period. Now, keep in mind, people, as I know all of us on the podcast are getting older here, 2014 to 2024, right? Like, that's 10 years could go by pretty fast when you're on an adventure. And what was Zim doing? Yes, we would have to assume he was keeping his ear to the ground for where the pure bloods were being hidden. And we heard that the forest they had to pass through was particularly treacherous, or at least the rumors around it were. As you know, in Conan, so much of the mythology is based on storytelling, rumors, and exaggeration. So what do we know about Zim during this 10-year period? We know, not unlike False Doom, I know we're going to have to compare this back to the 82 version, so I'll just get right in front of that right now. We see him amassing his power, amassing his army, establishing his conclave, where he's going to set up. He has a cool Skull Cave mountain that he either had to build or find. But the point is, much like False Doom, when Conan says in this movie, in the 2011 movie, I'm looking for the guy who killed my father, and he's like, oh, it's Zim. And he goes, no, Zim's the king. I'm looking for like some bandit. Right? He says that to the guy who's missing his nose. So he knows who Zim is, that Zim's been amassing his power and all that, but he doesn't realize that Zim's the same bandit that killed his father. So that is what's interesting about this. And that's what sets off all of the other chain of events. And you have to remember, too, Conan, everything we know about Conan is being told from the perspective of the end of his life. Like, we all know the telos of Conan is him becoming King Conan, right? So all the stories we're hearing, it's all foretold, it's all predestined. We see this in the 82 version with the witch that he throws into the fire. We see it in this version with the old man getting high with all of his hot nuns, to use your analogy. And we know that these things have to happen because they've already happened.
Strong words. There any rebuttals to that, Mr. Aiken?
He's run scared.
No, I'm just trying to think of the best way to approach this one.
I know, it's a good point.
So your argument, if I understand, is that it doesn't matter what the order of events are in this movie because it's already being told in retrospect?
Yeah, pretty much. But it's not that the orders don't matter. It's just that there are better explanations than what you just said as hand waving. 10 years is not a lot of time to amass a giant army. While you keep in mind, finding the pureblood, he only has his daughter that can smell her out, right? So everywhere they're looking for that pureblood, she has to go. That is a very limited resource, right? And then when they actually do find it, of course it's going to be foretold and predestined that Conan's going to be involved, because that's how these stories work, and that's why he becomes King Conan, is because fate always works out for Conan.
I see what you're saying.
Yes.
I don't think that directly addresses the point that I was making from a writing perspective on this one. So again, like
I think it does, because you're saying, why did it take 10 years? Like, why is the crown built and then seemingly nothing happens? And then he finds the pure blood. I'm saying that his master plan included way more steps than crown pure blood. He rose up from being this bandit warrior to being a king.
His role as quote unquote king in this movie is relatively irrelevant. His power of action doesn't seem any different than it was when he assembled the crown in the first place, having amassed a huge army of mixed barbarian tribes that all served him. You know, he's out there traveling independently. It doesn't present a scenario where he needed to have the resources of a kingdom necessarily to find the pure blood. We aren't given in the text of the film. Sure, we can surmise that is helpful for his quest, but ultimately he is already a warlord at the beginning of the movie, and with an army, and who enjoys participating on the front lines and being in the battles himself. And so it doesn't change his circumstances to be quote unquote a king in that interim.
If we could use a real world example, look at how patient China's being attacking Taiwan, right? They're not thinking in 10-year chunks. They're thinking in like 100 years chunks, right? Maybe this guy, he knows he's going to become immortal. He knows he's going to have the all the magic powers he's ever going to need when his wife comes back. 10 years is a drop in the bucket to him to have a better, more secure footing. And then again, they do find the pure blood. It just happens to take 10 years. I mean, you're not going to sit here and say he wasn't looking that whole 10 years.
No, but we don't see him looking. You know, like
we don't see anything. It flash forwards 10 years, and then that's the point. That now is where it's getting interesting, and that's why we jump in here. They're not going to show us the boring stuff.
Very procedural warlord things.
They're not going to show us the boring stuff. That should be on your tombstone, Mr. Schlender.
It just might be.
Mr. Aiken,
Sure.
if you'd care to address that, or if you want to move on to your next point.
I'm like a dog with a bone. You might just want to move on.
Yeah.
Whether or not the scenes are boring necessarily, they would be informative of of his quest, or at least give us more information about like the circumstances of finding the pureblood. Again, I find it an unsatisfying reveal and an unsatisfying villain's journey that the way he finds her and the I mean, pretty much all of this movie, but specifically.
Well, you kind of have to. It's why you're here.
Yes, yes. But the fact that he is able, the way that we see him coming upon this, and the fact that we are not given to understand how difficult a journey it has been, aside from the fact that they say it has been 10 years, but he clearly has been doing other things because they say he's become a king. You know, it would be almost more interesting if his resources had been almost wiped out by virtue of his quest to find this pureblood.
Now, I want to stop you there because you're making this a more interesting movie. You're not helping your case.
This
Case.
if
Okay, there you go. There you go. That's better.
You know, in a scenario where that was happening.
There you go.
Which I believe I was leading with. I have a hard time not doing that since my other podcast is actually doing a lot of this kind of conversation. But let's stick with our discussion about the writing of this movie. And instead of a structural standpoint of the writing, let's talk about the actual words that are said by them. You brought up Morgan Freeman. Did anyone else have like their eyes roll incredibly hard when Morgan Freeman's voice first graced our ears coming out of this movie? This is...
I assumed he did every movie.
I have described this movie in the past as 2011 as fuck. It is a movie that seems to be made from the time itself. And yes, Morgan Freeman was hot at this time. And yes, Morgan Freeman probably needed a paycheck. And yes, he is certainly an accomplished voice actor and voiceover performer.
Not a lot of residuals from March of the Penguins, I guess.
I'm just assuming that he probably could buy an additional house or get a gift for someone that was really, you know, it took him an afternoon to do this movie, and he presumably made a decent amount. But my point is that it's Morgan Freeman. You're not doing anything interesting or new with the choice of Morgan Freeman. You're just trying to buy gravitas that is in this movie unearned and kind of against the sort of metal aesthetic of the Barbarians. You know, Mako in the original, it serves like has a very unique kind of vocal style to him and is a character in the movie. You know, how much more interesting would the narrator be if it was, and I'm blanking on the name of the Conan's companion. Hang on.
The thief or the his pirate buddy?
His pirate buddy.
Said Takamudi, I believe, is his name.
Can't believe Ryan knew that. I was just shocked.
No, sorry, it's Artis that I was thinking of. If it was Artis or if it was Said Takamudi, either character would be interesting, because then they could be the chronicler of their stories. Instead, it's just kind of a random character, or it's just a random voiceover, and it again is trying to add, you know, sort of this more Tolkien-esque kind of gravitas to this world instead of a scenario of like Robert E. Howard, which is dirtier and has, you know, this like this poetry in how violent and grim the world it is. It's just a strange choice to have Morgan Freeman. He's just safe, and that feels wrong for a movie like this.
Now, let me ask you something then about Morgan Freeman case. If you were a king, and not just a king, the king of kings, right, in the Iberian age, and you could have anyone be your chronicler, you're going to have a guy with a sweet voice like Morgan Freeman. And let me tell you something, you guys can laugh, but again, that is how all these stories are framed. Again, Conan has a clear trajectory in all of the literature. He ends up being King Conan. We know that's the end. Every single Conan story is just a neat adventure he had on the way to becoming king. So you have a sweet chronicler like Morgan Freeman who's telling the story. The reason it couldn't be, what did we say his name was? Artas?
Artis, yeah.
Artis. The reason it could be Artis is because he doesn't keep hanging out with Artis. He moves on, just like he does in all the literature, just like he would do in the movies. He would move on and meet new people. Now, the reason it was Mako in the beginning is because in the first one is because they wanted Arnie to do it, and Arnie just couldn't really read the lines and sound good, and the producers, shat a brick. So they're like, well, who can read these lines, right? So that's why Mako does it in the first one. Now, would it have been more appropriate to have Momoa read it, or even cooler, have an old Arnold Schwarzenegger read it now?
Yes,
yeah,
I was thinking that exact thing. That would have been
that would have been cool, but it's not what they did. And like complaining about Morgan Freeman having a voice and gravitas, that's not going to get this movie to guilty. If anything, it's a point in my column. Judge, go ahead and count it.
Okay, so Case has 9 and you have 3.
I need those 3. They're going to come in handy.
Sure.
When did he
But
get
if this is acting as his bard, as his chronicler, then it is a frustrating, as is many of the things of this movie, that it is only at the very beginning and then at the transition point. In the 82 movie, for example, there were additional bits of narration throughout. Whereas this movie, it's just kind of there again, just to do quick exposition.
And thank God we have it. That way we get right back to the action. We did not need all the commentary in the first Conan, and trimming it down in this one was a smart move.
Those are words that you may eat someday, Mr. Schlender.
I
Mr.
doubt
Aiken,
it.
do you have any further exhibits?
He eats everything.
Yes. I would like to discuss again the actual words that were said. So while Morgan Freeman's narration is surface level and fine, and I mean superfluous, I would say, but it would be nice to have him be a more constant presence throughout the movie. I want to bring up things like what for the bailiff brought up, for example, the line I live, I love, I slay, and I am content. From this movie, we are looking at a movie where the dialogue is horrible. The ways people speak to one another are incongruous. It's either just raw exposition or it's just strange deliveries of lines that humans were not meant to speak. Perhaps
Except for the
8-bit were
bailiff.
meant to speak them.
Well, that's just the way people talk to the Iberian Age, Your Honor.
And here's my documentation to prove it.
Look, I'm not going to sit here and say that this dialogue is the strongest. I mean, I'm willing to admit that this is not a perfect movie, right? But again, we're here to determine whether it's guilty of being bad. And yes, the dialogue is exposition heavy, and Momoa doesn't stick the landing on every single line, but the lines he does land, they work. He's like, no man should live in chains. It's like, you might say like, oh, that's corny. But you know what? It's also pretty cool, because what does he go in? He goes in and messes up all the slavers after that. When the line you just said, like, I live, laugh, and pray, or whatever, whatever the hell he says. Because again, it doesn't really matter. Like, no one cares what like Momoa is saying. You watch him on mute. You look at the muscles. Come on, man. That's why we're here. So,
finally came out.
Yeah,
this is a movie that would have worked better as a music video.
Yeah, my point is, like, even when he says that, then what does he do? He pulls in the girl, kisses her, and they make love, or, well, they copulate. But that's what the movie's about, So you can't get hung up on the dialogue in a movie like this that is about those action set pieces, that is about moving. It's a very kinetic movie. It's about moving forward, moving on. It's going to the next thing, getting that action beat, seeing what Conan's going to do next. How is he going to solve this problem? Because we know Conan's going to win. That's the beautiful thing about Conan. I mean, even like as he was originally conceived, he could never lose. He was always smarter than everyone. He was always stronger than everyone. Right? So we always know that it's kind of like a Hyberian Age Superman. You know what I mean? So it's just like a matter of how he's going through it. How is he going to entertain us, getting out of this problem, saving the day. That's what the movie's about.
And wouldn't you say that an element of entertaining the audience would be good wordplay, or at least badass lines that we could all roll with? So yeah, I'm not here again to.
But it's not going to measure up to 82. If you're looking for that, like to hear the lamentations of their women kind of stuff, like this is not it. And I could admit to that, but it's such a small piece of the movie that it doesn't sink it. This doesn't get it to guilty.
Sure, that's fine. I am just trying to make clear that what we are, in terms of the pieces that make up this movie, we are both conceding that this is a bad element of the movie, and your argument here is just
I'm not saying it's a bad element. I am saying it's one of the weaker elements. I won't commit all the way to bad. That hurts my case too much.
But your point here is just that this by itself is not sufficient to bring it down. And what I would say that this is just part of the tapestry that does bring this movie down below the threshold of great, because or rather of good into a bad movie. Because this is a movie that I went to see in theaters. I wanted to love it. I am a huge fan of the Robert E. Howard books. I'm a huge fan of the movies, and I understand where those properties differ. But where this movie stumbles for me is that it should have just been a music video. I've said that a couple of times now, but it doesn't sound good. the words said do not make sense. The flirting between characters do not make sense. The badass lines fall flat. It's both performance, but they're poorly written lines. No, like the actors on here are all accomplished and are generally speaking pretty good. My one exception might be Rachel Nichols, who might be good, and I just have never seen her in a thing where she was given anything to do.
Oh no, she's never been good. You don't need to worry about that.
Oh wow, thanks,
I'll take that as law.
But I mean, the others, like Jason Momoa is coming off of Game of Thrones at this time. Now, admittedly, he was playing not a mute, but a character who didn't speak the English common language of the piece.
Galactic Basic,
right? Exactly.
That might have helped.
But he did a great job in that specific role. Stephen Ling has been great. Rose McGowan is great, and some of the lesser actor or the lesser parts in this have.
How can we forget the lieutenant who gets trebucheted? You want to talk about line delivery when he said, "I killed hundreds of Sumerians." That was brilliant. That was a great delivery. That was good. You got to like that one. Yeah, I loved it.
Do I?
I think I. Yeah, no, that was good. He's like, "Will you kill Sumerian?"
Do I though?
Mr. Aiken, any further exhibits?
Yeah, I would like to talk for a minute about Kalar Zim's stupid dual scimitar.
Okay.
Oh, man,
this thing,
if we must,
be a good point for you.
This thing is impractical and impossible in the era that we're talking about. I realize that the Hyborian Age has a mixture of technological levels, but the mechanisms involved in the movement of the scimitar are like I said, implausible for them to exist, but they would be impractical in the situation. The dual blade style there is actually to make it a worse cutting weapon when it's in its sword configuration, and a weaker weapon when it has to rotate into its other form. It would be easier just to have two blades, or to have a lance unto itself, or even one that could join together, but not one that has that sort of weird swinging mechanism to it. It's there to be kind of a cool set piece weapon, but it's just really fucking dumb.
Well, I mean, my objection is it is a cool set piece weapon. And one of the things with that, again, this is one of we constantly see this in not only this Conan movie, but in the previous Conan movies and again in the Conan literature. It's not all pure brute strength. Yes, physicality is a huge component. That's why, like, getting Stephen Lang as the bad guy, he's like the top tier jacked old dude in Hollywood, even in 2011. The guy's a beast. I love it. But it's also about smarts, right? And having that blade that can move around in ways that your opponent's not going to expect, that gives him an edge. And we see that it almost takes out Conan. But, Conan's smart too, so he's able to adapt. And then, like you said, he ends up taking it apart and using it as two swords for most of his direct engagements anyway. So yeah, maybe it's a little silly, but it's kind of cool. This is a fantasy movie. He's trying to resurrect his necromancer wife with a bone mask. We can forgive a dual-bladed sword.
Okay, boys, we are running pretty long, so I want to ask Case if he has any further exhibits before we pivot to Mr. Schlender.
I have several, but I'll go through these quick. Next up, I have a note to talk about the score, but I can't remember why. You know why? Because I can't remember the goddamn score. It's that goddamn boring. Now, this is not a point necessarily that is going to push a movie into the bad category, but it is a scenario where the movie is less than the sum of its parts. I would quickly like to cite the sexual politics of this movie. I realize that it is a setting that is rife with some ick factor, but this is a movie that has a lot of ick factor. Rose McGowan is trying to fuck her dad, and it's kind of it's a pretty gross kind of element to it all that doesn't really have any kind of payoff besides just her dad being like kind of icked by it. Then I would like to bring up the fact that this movie probably should be funnier. It's actually paced in a lot of ways where there are smash cuts that are laid out. They are structured as jokes, but often the tonal shift isn't appropriate for the kind of humor. I cite when the character whose nose has been cut off, when they say, "Oh, he's indisposed," and it cuts to him torturing a guy. Basically, they're structured to be funny moments, but they don't really succeed. And moving on to my last point, and this is at most the straw that breaks the camel's back. It's the lingering frustration of its nature as a remake that is dumber than the original. And that is because the original Conan the Barbarian from 1982 is actually a very smart deconstruction of the fantasy genre. There are fantastic ways where it plays with the nature of what a hero is supposed to do. He's a flawed hero. He's dealing with a weird supernatural threat, but they themselves are fairly strange, and their whole dynamics are the point. The point is that the 1982 Conan movie is very good, and this movie is unfortunately aping it in ways that are inferior, and while at the same time claiming to be more authentic to the original source material, despite not really being. And that's frustrating. It's frustrating that this movie isn't, at the very least, different. It's doing the same thing but worse, and that I feel is, like I said, that last straw that breaks this film's back.
Thank you, Mr. Aiken. Mr. Schlender, you may proceed with any further exhibits on your part.
All right, I'll keep it brief, Your Honor, because Case was very indulgent with my objections, so I was able to get a lot out there. So comparing it to the 82 movie, you say that like Conan is a flawed hero, and I think it's important to understand what that means. Conan is not flawed. He's basically perfect. Even in the 82 movie, his motivations are what are a little suspect at the beginning, and like at the beginning of this movie is because he's a second story man, like he's a thief, he's a pirate, he's an outlaw. And it's not until we get his mission crystallized into avenging his family in both movies where we start to see the more heroic traits come out. Because again, there's no doubt that Conan's going to win. If I may enter into evidence, Your Honor, I have in my formerly nicotine. Wow, I'm trying to do the old Rush Limbaugh line. I'm absolutely blowing it. So anyway, I got here Robert Jordan's The Further Chronicles of Conan. And can I just read you the names of the books that are included in this compilation?
Yes, you may.
Conan the Magnificent, Conan the Triumphant, Conan the Victorious. Again, this
Conan
is
the
how...
Fabulous.
Yeah, exactly. This is how Conan stories are told, in the 2011 version does a great job of that. You can accuse it of aping the 82 version too much, with it being the revenge story. It is remarkably personal. I will concede that. Most Conan stories are not personal. He usually shows up in a town and has to save the day, kind of like a D&D game, if you will, or a video game, if you will. But it does work in the major motion picture. You need that little kernel of personality, because let's face it, if you took out the fact that Zim killed his father, and this was just about him going after Zim because Zim's a bad dude. Let's say maybe he was hired by the surviving sisters to save the pureblood, which again would totally be a Conan story. Everything still works in this as a Conan story and is faithful to Howard's vision, and not just Howard's vision, but again, we have Robert Jordan writing books in the 80s, capitalizing off the popularity of it. We have Frank Frazetta's artwork, which is very evocative and used in this movie several times. So this is pulling from many, many relevant sources. And I apologize to the prosecution, that there's not a saber-toothed tiger in here. I mean, that would have been cool, but ultimately not necessary to bring this vision to life. Is it as ambitious as 82? Not even close. But is it still a good movie? And that's what we're here to discuss. And that answer is absolutely yes. This director brings us along on a sweeping adventure. We have grand vistas. We go from place to place with great action scenes. And when you combine that with all the other stuff I said while interrupting Case, I think I have a strong case, and I will rest there.
Both sides have rested their cases. The attorneys will now present their closing arguments. Mr. Aiken, you may begin.
Gentle persons of the jury, the question of whether or not this is a good movie isn't really on you. That's not the question here. The question is this actually bad? And I would say that we are looking at a movie that its best traits are select casting, and perhaps a few set pieces that were at best CGI rich. You are looking at a movie that had the barest amount of effort put into its actual qualities. You are looking at a movie that is barely memorable in most regards. And you are looking at a movie that had dreams of grandeur and didn't actually feel like putting the effort in to making it so. And you were looking at a movie that, frankly, the audiences would seem to support my stance that this is a bad movie. It was a box office bomb and is poorly rated on all of the various Metacritics. So do with that what you will, but just understand that history has shown so far that this is a bad film.
Thank you, Mr. Schlender. Please present your closing argument.
Thank you, Your Honor. 2011's Conan is a movie out of place and out of time, not unlike Case was just saying. The audience clearly not looking for this. It's at a stunning 30% on Rotten Tomatoes audience score, just for one reference. But I suspect if we got talented musicians together to record Bach, modern audiences would still ask for Taylor Swift. And, well, our modern audiences for movies, they're still asking for more crossovers. They're asking for more multiverses. They are leaving episodic adventure behind. Conan may have been the last gasp, but it will endure. And it will find its audience one day. Because one day, when we are wiping the sick spit up of too many multiverses and decide that maybe we do want something simple, something that does not ask a goddamn thing from us, well, let me tell you something, people. Let me tell you something. Conan the Barbarian 2011. You'll be there. You'll be there waiting for you. Thank you.
With a knife.
Wow. Thank you both.
Double sword.
Members of the jury, Mr. Maynard Bangs, Mr. Big Ben Haslar, and Mr. Recycled Nickname Ryan Luis Rodriguez, you have all heard the facts concerning this case. It is now up to you to determine if this film is guilty of being a bad movie. The bailiff will escort you to the deliberation room to render your verdict.
I keep telling you lot, the door's right over there. If you do not listen, to hell with you. Little Conan reference.
Are you going to be Conan the Barbarian?
That's very telling of you, Rob. That's Conan reference. It is. Boy, that shows that you really cared about this movie.
I don't know. Could I do an Arnold? Come on, Reagan. Give those people air. No, that's terrible. No, it's you, Rob.
Give the people the ale.
Oh, I only if I still be Ben the Bonbendian.
Put that cookie down.
All right, then you're foreman.
Okay, gentlemen. I had to start this movie 3 times because I lost interest twice. It is so boring. Oh
Is
my
this the most
gosh, it
boring
is
movie
so
we've
boring.
ever done?
That's a strong possibility. It's a strong possibility. It just might be.
Everything about it, to Case's point, feels very contrived. Like the mask being broken into pieces. That's very Tomb Raider. There's a lot of hand waving. You don't care about anything that's going on really from scene to scene. Even the action scenes, except for the sand zombie. Sand zombie was awesome. Everything else very forgettable. I don't know. I haven't had a hard time remembering like the points talked about. Like how many peninsulas were there? I don't remember. Rob, what did you think?
Well, I agree. I did not restart the movie because fuck that. But it was one where I was checking my phone a lot. The thing is, clearly there is a lore here that I'm not familiar with, but there's obviously a niche audience that would be interested in it. And
you think so? You don't think it's just because like the books are interesting?
He's
he likes the books.
A lot of this, right? Well, that's what I'm talking about. That's the audience I'm talking about. People who like,
but it doesn't capture that, right?
Well, yeah. That I guess is the question. And I would say Dylan argued that it does. Case argued that it didn't. But as far as receipts, it sounded like Dylan had more receipts there. As far as this follows the source material, so it's kind of like if there are people who would hate the Lord of the Rings movies if they don't know anything about the lore and don't care about fantasy. They would probably think they're very boring. So I don't know if
you think so.
If that kind of pushed me one way. I did like Rose McGowan.
You like your Freddy Krueger fingers?
I loved it. Yeah. I'm into the whole thing. Ron Perlman was a bit forgettable though. They could have probably put a lot of people in there. But Momoa, I think, is the worst part, and I think he's what sinks the whole movie. He's just not good, first off.
This was a time when I found him absolutely charmless and just completely like, what? Okay, so he was in one season of Game of Thrones. We're giving him his own franchise. Like, really?
Yeah, he was also in Stargate Atlantis.
Upset? Yeah, that too. But I mean, nobody watched that. People watch Game of Thrones.
Well, I appreciate putting him in this product where we're trying to show off his body, which is the one thing he had.
Yeah,
but he's kind of fun. He's kind of a goof, and this is not his personality.
That's not here
capture
at all.
No. Right. That doesn't come till Aquaman.
And
Dune.
Muddy. Like it's hard to pay attention to. It's very muddy.
Oh, I hate how this movie looks. The shutter speed is so ugly, and every single sword fight is shot in a way that the swords clang and then cut, then clang and then cut. And literally, you cannot space out the geography of a single sword fight because every single time Marcus Nispel has to move the camera or crane it in some way and have it be an accent instead of just letting a scene play out. It's like how people say that Christopher Nolan can't direct a fist fight. Well, Marcus Nispel cannot direct a sword fight to save his life.
That's probably not as popular.
Yeah, probably not.
Even if it has a sand zombie?
And then, but things that I did like, a truly funny acrobatic sex scene. That was, oh boy, did that take me by surprise. I was not expecting it to be so 1980s music video long-windy.
Acrobatic sex. I can't even place where that is this movie.
Exactly.
How do I forget about the acrobatic sex scene?
But the biggest disappointment of this entire movie, Andy Richter never shows up.
Oh, yeah.
Because he died?
Because it's the other Conan there.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm lame. You have to spell those jokes.
That was purposefully the worst possible joke I could give.
No, that's a good joke.
Ryan, give me some time here.
Well, go ahead, Rob. Say something nice about the film that you've been piling on.
I said I liked Rose McGowan.
Okay.
And I think if I was familiar with the source material, I probably would be interested in something that was more loyal to it, especially like I do like Frank Frazetta's art for all the obvious reasons. So I mean, I think I'm fine with that. But then this needs to be just a little more tongue in cheek. This needs to be a little closer to heavy metal.
Yeah.
Now, and it is tough because there was so much rebuttal. Case didn't get to cover a lot of his points too towards the end, but I think he did get some good points in. But Schlenzo definitely brought a lot of his receipts on the source material. So I'm wavering a little bit. I don't know if anyone wants to lock in one way.
Right?
I'll lock in. This is a guilty movie. When I sat down to watch it, I had forgotten that I'd already seen it, which is if I can completely forget that a movie entirely exists in my subconscious, that's a bad sign. I know my mind's pretty fucked up, but that's bad. Movie bad. Conan no make good movie since 1982. Me no like. Guilty.
You making it interesting?
I do think this was an incredibly boring movie. I mean, it really was. It just slips right off the brain. I think Schlender brought the best case there was for it. He definitely went into the source material and brought a lot. I just think there's no movie to back his case up. That's the problem. There's no, there's nothing behind it. His client's super guilty. So I am gonna lock in guilty.
Yeah, not to pile on, but this does not make me interested in the source material at all. The Schwarzenegger one does.
You would like the Frank Frazetta stuff. You would find it very interesting, and then not interesting at all.
So I think it is possible to make a movie where you're interested in all this world, and I do think a movie that like tears itself away from Arnie and that kind of lightning in a bottle that they had. I think there is probably a movie there, but this ain't it. It's boring. He closed with, "Will this find its audience?" I don't think it will. We're 10 years removed from it. I think if it showed up 10 years before, I don't think anyone would care then either. So yeah, it's just lost to the annals of history. It didn't accomplish what it wanted to do, which was to be a fun action movie. So guilty. So let's go tell that very handsome judge.
Mr. Foreman, have you reached a verdict?
We have, Your Honor, in the case of The People versus Conan the Barbarian, the Jason Momoa version, we find the defendant guilty of being a bad movie.
Oh no! Oh no!
I feel bad for Schlenzo, though. He would have to watch that movie like 3 times to understand it.
Oh, well.
The verdict is so rendered. Conan the Barbarian is hereby sentenced to the netherworld, where it shall ponder the riddle of steel for an eternity. Court is adjourned.
Loud, this is Conan the Barbarian because somebody else didn't want to do the voice.
I was too coward.
Case Aiken, what did you think of that stupid jury's verdict?
I mean, obviously, I have to open with, "I crushed the enemies, I saw it driven before me, and I'll see the lamentation of their women."
Not bad, it's not bad.
But no, Schlenzo put up an amazing case. But I kind of knew that I was going into it for a movie that was particularly bad, because I picked this movie.
Yes, you did. Not very fair, was it?
I picked this movie knowing it, like, in my mind when I was asked, like, "Oh yeah, this is a movie I don't like," and like, and then I went to go like start writing notes, and I was like, I can't remember anything about this movie. And I did an episode of my podcast on this movie where I went in goddamn deep and did a full reconstruction of the script of this movie from the perspective of it still being the same director with the same production budget and like production team, and I couldn't remember those details. I re-listened to that episode and I was like, oh, I really knew what I was talking about. And this movie has completely left my brain. I just remember the hate. And so I knew that I was going in a strong position, but man, Dylan brought a great case. Like I cannot speak highly enough about a lot of the details that he brought on this one. I disagree in terms of being like, which is a more, from a Robert E. Howard fan perspective, like I don't think this movie scratches those itches, and you know he had a really uphill battle, and I'm happy with the outcome, but I was very impressed with how he brought it.
That's good. Let's bring him in where he says, "Hey, puny Schlender, you're puny compared to me because I'm so Conan the Barbarian." So, what did you think of that jury's verdict?
All right, don't worry about this, Conan, because this is going to come
the Barbendian.
Yep, the Barbendian, and this is going to come up on Appeals of Justice, where it's to be trial by combat.
Oh, no.
So I'm going to take on the whole court as soon as I figure out how my two-headed spinny axe thing works. So I'm going to need a couple months to train.
Let me know if you need a tagging partner.
Yeah, exactly, right? And that's what we're going to, and then, bam, and then I'm going to, like, pull it apart, and it's actually going to be 2 axes, and then maybe you'll have, like, a lightsaber at the bottom. It's going to be really cool and stylistic, and we'll settle it then. But I'll tip my hat to Case for now. He made a very strong argument, and this is what the Reels of Justice is here for, baby. And I'll talk to you guys later.
Good. I'll take that puny bangs. You take the rest of them. That's all the time we have for the Reels of Justice. Get to the post-trial analysis.
Do it now.
Do it now.
All right, now that we could drop lawyer characters. Oh my God, I hated this.
Oh,
one.
good. Oh, thank God.
It is so boring. I had to restart it and try to pay. I kept spacing out, and
It's like, oh no, I got to do a podcast. I got to pay attention to this.
I
shut
challenge
my
somebody
phone off.
at home, watch this movie just once, no rewinding, no subtitles,
Yeah.
no script, and then come tell us what it was about at the end. Because it is fucking impossible to follow. I don't want to talk about it anymore.
No, but it's amazing that everyone I'm talking to said, all of you guys said that, and that's how I mean, everyone is this is like a black hole of a movie. It's insane.
Right.
Absolutely. You wanna
It
put kids
is
to sleep?
possible to be baked enough that a riff tracks approach to
No,
it is
I
okay.
try.
I would love a riff tracks of this. I would totally watch that, but they would never do it because they
But
would be
the
bored
level
out
of
their
drugs
skulls.
you need are just it's just not budget friendly.
There's not enough shrooms in Wisconsin. Case, what are you doing when you're not making fun of this movie? What keeps you busy?
So day job is I am a liquor distributor. So
Good, we'll need it.
Yeah. So
You didn't bring
DC,
it with
Maryland,
you.
and Delaware area. But I am also a podcaster, and I host 2 other shows, which are Another Pass, which is the show I alluded to, where we talk about movies that we find fascinating but flawed. And this movie is fascinatingly bad because the franchise I love. And so we'll talk about them and then try to hypothesize from the time of production what could have been done to make them a better movie. I've had several of you on at this point, and maybe some episodes still to drop with others of you. And then my other show is Men of Steel, which is a Superman and Superman adjacent appreciation show where we kind of just talk about wouldn't it be cool to be Superman, and here are some really cool Superman stories or stories with characters like Superman. Dylan, you were on recently. We were talking about evil Superman and the
I love
various
that.
versions.
I had a blast. As people on this show know, I can talk, and we had a great conversation on that show. But you cut out the best joke, Thundercast.
Oh yes. Did that make the post? I don't know.
No, it didn't. But that's okay. It'll just be for you and me. It'll be our thing.
I'm gonna hear about it later. So Another Pass and
Men of Steel.
Men of Steel, and we can find you on Twitter.
Twitter, you can find me at Case Aiken. At most of those platforms, you can find me at Case Aiken, except for Instagram, where I'm still using my AIM screen name from high school, which is Quetzalcoatl 5, because I was a pretentious mythology nerd and a Legion of Superheroes nerd in high school. Yeah,
Not a Final Fantasy VIII nerd.
Now we always ask for recommendations from our guests for movies you think people should see. So what is a movie you think people should see?
I think that if you're looking for a movie that is a swords and cool music, a music video ish barbarian style movie, I'm going to recommend the original Highlander. Which
unfortunately Ben's already recommended it, and there can be only one. No, I'm kidding. Keep going. Keep going. Tell us why it's great.
So the original Highlander is one of my favorite movies. It is delightfully exactly what you the most you could get for the budget it had, and one where if you gave it more money, there would only be diminishing returns. It is a fascinating, weird movie about people fighting to the death with samurai swords in New York City in the 1980s
in parking garages.
Yes, with weird explosions and psychic powers and attuning themselves to deer. It's such a weirder movie than the rest of the franchise ultimately became, kind of in the same way that the original Alien movie is a lot weirder than the rest of the franchise when they just became bugs. The original Highlander, there's so much possible strangeness, and it's so vague and interesting that they got Sean Connery to play an Egyptian who's disguised as a Spaniard while set in Scotland. But it's a ton of fun, and I think it holds up very well, and it's just a delightful movie. And there's a bit of buzz because Henry Cavill is attached to do a remake for it.
Ooh, get the Cavill in there.
It's a great riff.
And you're
tracks
covering
as
the
well.
sequel, right? On Another Pass next.
Yes, that is actually our next episode, which you have inside knowledge on.
Ooh, spoilers. Schlenzo, what have you got for us?
Thank you, Maynard. Well, as you may or may not know, Robert E. Howard was friends with H.P. Lovecraft, and the two would reference each other in their work from time to time. So I wanted to look for a Lovecraftian-inspired hacker for my recommendation. So here it is, boys. Gods of the Deep from 2023. A new deepest underwater trench is discovered near the Arctic shelf, and a plucky group of scientists decide to explore, and they find what appears to be an intellectually distinct elder god. The low budget does not hurt this movie, as the actors are really trying, and the creature effects are passable, though maybe overused. I think this fits nicely into that underwater horror cosmic genre, better typified recently by underwater. But like all the greats are in this case passables, there will be hacker analogs and knockoffs, and we are better for it. So you all know where this is streaming. You don't need me to say it, do I? Should I say it, Ryan?
Criterion Channel.
It's on Tubi.
Of course. Oh no, I'm Bethulu. Ryan, what have you got for us?
My recommendation this week concerns my first encounter with Hong Kong auteur Johnny To, whose film The Heroic Trio I previously recommended, 2004's Throwdown. Okay, see if you got this. We got Zito Bo, a former judo champion collapsed into boozy depression, and Mona, a wannabe singer taken advantage of by a corrupt manager who collide at a karaoke bar and team up to destroy Bo's mentor's defunct dojo in a winner-take-all judo match. But Bo is hiding a tragic secret. He's losing his vision at an alarming rate, so it might be his last shot at glory! The film dials down the maximalism of previous To films I've seen since, but retains his sense of composure, composition, and atmosphere. A slyly funny little picture that I've already revisited in the span of a year, which is mighty unusual for me and should speak volumes. Throwdown is currently not streaming on Tubi, but you can find it on the pretentious version, the Criterion Channel.
I love it. Actually, that sounds really good.
That's the
really
pretentious
good.
version of it. Now,
yes.
Schlenzo really put the squeeze on Case today, but maybe my recommendation this week can help Case put the squeeze back, and it's 2024's Anaconda, a Chinese reimagining of the 1997 masterpiece. That's right, I said it. 1997's Anaconda is a masterpiece. If you don't like it, you can suck my pan flute. It follows a group of circus performers on tour through, let me see here, the rainforest of Thailand, of course, as they are terrorized by both giant man-eating snakes and the hunter obsessed with capturing them. Sadly not played by Jon Voight, who had a previous commitment to tarnish his legacy elsewhere. The production value on this number was a bit all over the place. There are moments when the CGI snake looked convincing enough, and then there are moments when it's data moshing all over the screen like Max Headroom on Crank. But overall, the production value is decent, at least a notch higher than the average sci-fi channel hacker, and it's an earnest love letter to the original, while also knowing when to branch off and do its own thing, for better or worse. I'm just glad to see one of my favorite 90s creatures features finally getting some more love, and we'll ultimately see how this compares to the potential reboot that Sony Pictures is rumored to be working on. And if you're listening to this, Sony Pictures, thanks for listening first. But also, why bother rebooting Anaconda when you could just make a Lega sequel with an aged but fit Jennifer Lopez, who has become a cutthroat river guide herself over the past 25 or so years? If she can pilot a mech, she can fight an anaconda. And by the time this releases, she'll be split up with Ben Affleck again and looking for a project. So give her a call.
Dude, I hope she has an eye patch in this movie that you're proposing.
Oh, a scar. A scar, because an anaconda almost got her, and she cuts her way out of it. It's fucking sick, and it's really symbolic about rebirth. Big Ben, what have you got for us?
I love sword and sorcery movies, but except for the Lord of the Rings, there aren't many recent examples that are any good. So why not go back to 1958 to The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad? The cast of this film is very white, like distractingly white in these Arab cities and dressed in Arab clothing. That distraction is perhaps most pronounced when English writing shows up towards the end of the film. But I'll tell you what, these guys dreamed big. They wanted to tell an epic story as they could with giant cyclopses, sword-swinging skeletons, fire-breathing dragons, and two-headed birds. And in contrast to the modern approach of CGI, the effects by Ray Harryhausen show the absolute love and care they bring to make these creatures come to life and have them interact with the cast in a believable way. I may be aware that the skeleton is stop motion, animated, and Sinbad is melded together on a blue screen, but the choreography and the framing is so perfect, I'm sold on it. They had to work to achieve that effect. They had to do it so many times, and you could feel that love and attention even today. Oftentimes, actors seem very unaware of what they're interacting with today's CGI monsters on the screen. Your eye can get very lost trying to spot where the action is, but not in this film. I'm not against CGI. It's a very useful tool, but I think there's still a lesson to be learned where they had to actually work to achieve that visualization, that excited to get that vision in their head and make it as believable as possible. So you can be sitting there in that TV screen, truly transported to somewhere magical. And you can find it on, Dylan.
Tubi?
Yes.
Hey!
I wonder how many of the Harryhausens are up on there.
I have no idea.
Hopefully a few.
And Ben, they are making good modern sword and sorcery movies. Most of them are on Tubi and have Kevin Sorbo in them. You just gotta look.
No.
No, he's tarnishing his legacy somewhere as well, I'm afraid. But that's all the time we have to tarnish our legacy this week. But we want to thank Case Aiken for joining us. Thank you so much, Case.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me back on. I just want to point out that my win streak is maintained here.
I just want to point you out. You defended you wanted to prosecute this piece of crap. So. We'll put an asterisk against that last one, but point made. We're not going to hold back on you anymore. And I hope everyone else joins us again when that happens, as the reels of justice keep turning.
I saw this twice.
I slay queen.
Case took your bit.
Please follow us on Twitter at Reels of Justice, Instagram Reels of Justice, and Facebook.com/Reels of Justice.